and we can continue with gossip. So Neha, what's up? What's new? I hope you, Vijay, you know Neha and you know each other.
I think so. I've seen your name many times.
Yeah, recently I just wrote to you like for collaboration for a conference actually that we are going to organize in April 20, like towards the end of April. It's a saga of India migration. So
you got the answer, I think, no?
Yeah. Professor Morit, he just gave me permission. Yes, we can use like logo and like we are in collaboration with Manipal University, Jaipur.
That's good. Yeah.
Yeah, this is in fact, Vijay Neha is a young scholar, very active. In addition to her academics, they are running a non-profit organization. And you know what it is called? It's called Guthrie.
Oh.
Very befitting expression for endangered root engagement. In fact, Guthrie, because you know many of them went with Guthrie's only.
Yeah, it's the cultural baggage. So we are focusing on their cultural practices, and we are also trying to create a group of scholars who are working on indentured labor migration, and we are also trying to focus on like whether like their cultural practices and how they are maintaining their cultural roots, if there are any changes. So sort of these things we are trying to do through our organization. So we have also organized some cultural activities, cultural meet in collaboration with ARSP, and Sir was also like there, and he's like in continuous support we are getting. So definitely we'll do something in this direction also.
All right.
We're hoping, sorry, go ahead.
Both agree, then we can start 10 minutes in advance rather than taking 10 minutes after 60 minutes are over.
Okay.
Normally, that is what we do. We aim to finish in 60 minutes. It never ends in 50 or 60 minutes, right? And I'm sure they will be the same, because when the conversation is interesting, you do not want to stop it.
Of course.
And that is the, I think, virtue of in this dialogue. So, Ruchi, should we start? Yes, all right, we start.
Fine,
I have everybody's permission. So let me formally welcome all of you. Really happy to see you all. Neha and of course Asutosh, we meet more often. But I'm very, very glad to see Vidya. In fact, it's really a long break. I still remember when we met. I think we met a couple of times in Mauritius, not so many times as I would have loved to, in fact. And that is a time when you were really very closely associated with developing this whole idea of indentured root project. And I was, in a way, also associated with this. And if you remember, it was launched during 180th anniversary. And that was the year when UNESCO, in fact, had approved the project. And we had our former External Affairs Minister there, Mrs. Sushma Swaraj. And she was invited to, in a way, also jointly, officially launch the project with headquarters at, of course, AGTF and the knowledge grounding at MGI. And I know while there are many institutions which are working on this, but you have really been at the center of all that. I know how you developed that whole idea because of your experience with the slave root project. Of course, you will tell us how similar or how different these two projects are. And then probably I will share with you my experience when we had to deal with the concept of what is called the modern day slavery. And there was a huge controversy in terms of using the word slavery for the current, what is called illegal immigration or trafficking. Maybe we'll come to that during our conversation. Today we thought, let me give the background why we are doing it. I'm sure you all know about Antarashtriya Sahayog Parishad ILRP, and this organization has been working on diaspora issues for almost 40 plus years now. They are in a way pioneers of engaging with diaspora when we didn't have the structures in place yet to engage with diaspora in an organized way. So they were doing it, and they have been associated with developing a lot of Government of India initiatives on diaspora, including the Pravasi Bharatiya Divas and a lot of other initiatives. Today, if you look at, for example, the website of the Overseas Indian Affairs, you see easily about 12.5 schemes for diaspora. And they did not exist when you go back by, say, 15, 20 years. So this is a wonderful, I always say it's a fascinating story where, diaspora grew in terms of its capacity, in terms of its importance, in terms of its global contribution. And then India also grew post-independence into a major geopolitical entity. And then, of course, the technology came to help all of us. It was absolutely impossible to contemplate these contexts when the indentured laborers were taken out of India. In fact, most of them went thinking that they will probably never come back again, and many of them, in fact, did not come back again or could not come back again. Right? I wish we had similar technology then, and they were able to maintain contacts back home. So the back home people kept imagining what they were doing there, and they must have been imagining as to what their family back home is doing. And when we had the air links, and when people started coming back to their old villages and regions to see where they went from, Vijaya, Neha and Asutosh are all fully familiar with their sentiments when they came. And the other day I was kind of reading an interview with Professor Brijlal, who sadly passed away recently, where in fact he talks about his first visit to his old village, and then he meets a family there, and this family kind of very emotionally start this. All as in India we always do. They touched his feet, they hugged him, they started crying, they started telling him, why don't you stay back? In India now, India is very different, and I'm sure you will enjoy. And you know what Brijlal says, in fact, he says, I felt that this is what we are. But then I also felt that this land is no more his. He is a, and that is where he grew up. And he said, while I could identify with the culture, I could identify with the behavior, everything, but I could not consider myself as an Indian. So I was a Fijian, but then ironically, he says, when I go back to Fiji, or when I went back to Fiji, Fiji, in a way, gave him the impression that he was not the Fijian and he was not welcome to stay there. Now, this is one story which I'm sure would have been repeated time and again with many of the diaspora prominent members. I'm sure you have heard about how things happened in many of the Caribbean countries, in fact. Fiji, of course, I just mentioned. In a way, Vijay, you will agree with me, Mauritius has been very lucky that way. Because in Mauritius, the indentured, they, in fact, in a way, built a post-independent Mauritius. So they didn't have to face the situation where somebody could tell them that, oh, you are not from this land. So, that way I consider Mauritius in a way was very fortunate with that kind of experience. So today we will listen to you, because you are the expert, I am not. What kind of story you want to tell? What kind of the story of separation, the story of longing for that relationship, the story of not knowing your roots, the story of trying to find your roots, and then story that when you reach the roots, you felt, oh my God, this is me, but it's not exactly me, right? So please, I would love to listen to this, and that was the purpose of this whole initiative of Dialogue with Diaspora, which is a very, very informal, casual platform for engagement with people from diasporic communities and those who know about this history. So this is our, I think, 5th session, because this is a relatively new initiative, because most of the time we had very formal meetings with a lot of ministers and ministerial presence. And as a result, the mainstream stories did not find time to express themselves. So we thought through this channel, we will give time for the mainstream stories, which have not really been heard by ordinary people. Let them listen to these stories and feel proud and feel the pain of that journey, right? And as I said, after knowing what struggle they went through, they should also feel proud what they have done. You know, struggle is one part of the story, and the success is the other part of the story, which helps you overcome that pain. So I thought, let me start with Vidya, because I have not heard you for many years now. And I know you were really the driving force behind this indentured labor route project. Tell me, Vidya, what brought you to that idea, in fact, and what's happening now, and where do we go in future? Take about 5-6 minutes. Tell us that story.
I know you sent us a few questions, and so I've sort of gone through those answers accordingly. So this is a project, the Indentured Labor Route Project is a project that is very, very dear, and that Mauritius has cherished for a very long time. It has taken time to materialize, but in the 1980s and 90s, long before the Apravastika Trust Fund created, many scholars and artists, individuals wanted for a more sort of formalized collaboration between countries that would give support to their own initiatives, whether they wanted to set up art exhibitions or write a book or conduct research. So when they tried to work with others from the diaspora, at least there's a structure which is there to support them and give them letters of recommendation, whatever, some funding, etc. So having a formal structure with government support was considered to be essential to provide this kind of service to members of the indentured labor diaspora. So many brainstorming sessions were held at the Mahatma Gandhi Institute, which many of you know. But allow me to be a little frank with you today. At that time, in the 80s and 90s, many Mauritians and others in the indentured labor diaspora, they somehow felt that somehow they were not considered as equal in India to the NRIs. They felt that they were in a sort of lower category. So they did feel this very keenly, and that's why they felt the need for something devoted only to indentured labor was required, a formal structure to support the diaspora. So when the newly created Apravastika Trust Fund was began to function in 2002, it took over the responsibility and the burden in a way to continue brainstorming and to conceptualize the indentured labor route. At that time, we had given it other names, crossing the seas and so on. And finally, in 2011, Ashutosh was there, a major international conference on indentured labor took place in Mauritius, 2011. And finally, the concept, objectives was more fully discussed with a huge body of scholars. And so the groundwork began now to finalize the concept and formally establish the road. And as you know, the rest of the story, the desire was to create an institution to facilitate the sharing of information, knowledge, services among members of the indentured diaspora. So in 2014, the dossier was finally ready, was sent to UNESCO and received UNESCO's blessing. But one thing I have to say is that the government of Mauritius was the main initiator of this project, and they did want to retain control. They wanted the diaspora to retain control of the project. And when UNESCO asked them to model it along with the slave route project, they felt that they wanted to retain control and not lose control of it by sort of handing over the structure to UNESCO. So I think it has been good for the diaspora to retain control of this project. So what is it composed? It's primarily a scientific committee, an international scientific committee, which puts forward proposals to meet all the objectives that they had laid out. There are also several subcommittees responsible for the 3 regions that we have divided the world into. Indian Ocean, of course, with India and Mauritius in it, the Atlantic Caribbean region, and then, of course, Pacific region. So the committee members are appointed by either by their governments or by members of the scientific committee who nominate and then vote on the members. So I don't know if that gives you the sort of historical background.
Thank you so much, Vijaya. In fact, I can understand that feeling when, many indentured route countries felt that, they were not NRIs. And it's basically, it was a technical thing, right? And we had to find a solution to that. Because as you know, NRIs were basically Indian nationals. So they were holding Indian passports. So it was a technicality which required an amendment to the citizenship law in India. And that is what precisely happened when we went in for bringing in the concept of first the PIO cardholders and then the OCI cardholders, and then gradually finding solutions to the operational difficulties. I'm sure you remember when I was in Mauritius, I had to really struggle a bit to waive the 4th generation cap on the OCI eligibility, in fact. And I still remember it was entirely kind of steered by former External Affairs Minister, Mrs. Sushma Swaraj. When she heard our conversation in Mauritius, she was very touched. She said, leave it to me, we'll find a solution to this problem. And we found a solution to that problem. But still, there are many issues which we are still trying to find answers to. And I'm sure step by step, we will find those answers. I now switch to Asutosh. Asutosh, I have seen your work also in bits and pieces, not exactly as comprehensively as you own it. In fact, what I really liked in your articulation was the so-called push and the pull factors in the indentured experience. I heard many stories, mixed feelings, where was it an unfortunate experience, or at the end of the day, not so unfortunate experience, or it was a mix. It started very unfortunate, but then turned into not so unfortunate. Tell me, because I heard your articulation, very interesting. What was pushing them out, and what was pushing them, and where they felt deceived in a way. For example, Mauritius, which when everybody will say we were brought here to find gold, and when we came here, we found only jungles. There was hardly any gold, but we worked to turn this land into gold, right? So, how would you explain that point?
Yeah, thank you so much, sir. Let me begin with a little bit on the, my association with this ILRP, Indian Child Leader, and why it was important and how my research actually associated me with, this project. So, I mean, when we talk about the, global development or discourse on the global development, uh, we always ignore, even in the international academia, you will not find anything mentioned on indentured. Everybody was talking about slaves' contribution in capitalist development or in development of empire and post-empire thing. No one talked actually on indenture, and that is why this project was important. And I'm really grateful to Professor Tilak that she invited me in 2010 for 11 for that conference, and from there I think it this moment started, and she definitely led, and we are all are working under him on this project. Before, I mean, that time in 2011 when I joined with Professor Tilak, in 2006 actually I happened to have attend a meeting by Professor Brizlal, who came to attend a attend this diaspora conference in Delhi. I think in 2006 one conference happened in Delhi, and I listened to him, and he inspired me to do on the indenture, and that was the one who inspired me, and that's how I started. Even in Indian academia, what I thought, I mean, before me in Delhi University, you will not find any thesis on indentured labor. Why was it so? Because even Indian academia was not considering diaspora Indians as their own history. So once somebody is out of India, out means geographical background, out of the geography of India, then that the person was not part of the Indian history. And that's how you will not find, any depth research on indenture or Indian diaspora, especially related to indenture Indian diaspora in India. So then I started researching on indenture Indians. And as you mentioned that the both kind of the stories were there while I was going through the primary sources, looking to their voices. So definitely being a historian, I started my research through the archival exploration. So I went to National Archives of India and tried to look into the first-hand reports, official reports, definitely because in archives you get more on official report rather non-official. So when I explored, then all the time they had their own perspective. Perspective, obviously, colonial government will write in their own way. But when I moved from the archive, went to the field, went to Mauritius, Fiji, Suriname, Natal, and many other countries, then I found something else. So both kind of story, the push and pull, both kind of stories were there. So it was difficult for me to decide or to narrate how to narrate this story of indenture, that whether I should go with the push factor or the pull. Then I choose I should go beyond that and trying to look what circumstances actually compelled them. So definitely economic problems were there, and that is why many people were moving out or choose to go. Uh, During my research, because at that time, Tinkerian thesis was much more prevalent. Everybody was talking in terms of coercion and, pushed, model actually. But when I went through the indentured perspective, you can say, or the Grimitia's perspective, then what I found that, if you look to the earliest report, for instance, of 1838 or 40s, 50s reports, in the peasant memory, many new words were coming. For instance, Arkati. So Arkati were, these were purely new words for, early 19th century India. Or, Damara, Mirich, Chinitat. These were the terms which came through the indenture migration actually. And when I found that in the villages, in the countryside, such terminologies were so much prevalent, then it means people were aware about this phenomena. So what I give my argument that as Tinker said that, people were not knowing where they are going. I said they had some sense, and that is why they created their own terminology. So they peasantized the whole, an English word. Actually, they made it their own. So they created Arcati, Trinidad. So through such kind of local vocabulary, I tried to give some argument that they were definitely knowing. The level may vary, but definitely they were aware about such phenomena. So that's how. And apart from that, when you read Totaram Sanadhya's account on women, actually, I edited a book called Bhutlen Ki Katha with Professor Brizlal. And in that book, I have edited the, what he actually found when he interviewed too many women in Fiji. And there you find that how women went. Most of the women said that they face suppression in home by in-laws or sas sassur, etc. So that's why they left. Many women left because of because their husbands were going. So that's how they went. So these kind of stories are there. So that's made actually my research more interesting, and even now I'm doing further on that.
Great, Asutosh. In fact, you were probably very lucky to have come in contact with Professor Brajlal,
Right.
because when I look at the research into diaspora, especially the endangered diaspora, I think he was the first one who examined the issue from a scholarly, academic point of view.
Right.
So he, in fact, detached a bit from purely emotional narration and expression, but went into it scientifically.
Right.
And that opened the way for many other scholars to look at this experience in a very, very different manner. Now, in case, for example, he has not started this process, I'm sure, we might have lost some of the key points of this story, in fact.
Right.
Because the way, the indentured started primarily from India, though they went from many other countries. They go to Mauritius, then from Mauritius, they go to Fiji and other places, Caribbean, and then they lose contact amongst themselves. Now the indentured diaspora in Fiji remained completely isolated, not only from India, but from other indentured societies for nearly, 100 years? Right? Now, somebody had to collect these threads and then weave those threads into a story which would create a common interest amongst the diaspora, amongst Indian people, and amongst the indentured societies, that there was something common for them to explore, study, and narrate for the future generations. So there, in fact, I give a lot of credit to Professor Brajlal for starting that. How many people would have gone to university and do a PhD on indentured in those years? Amazing, right? So I think you are lucky in a way that you worked with him and you were inspired by many of our scholars were inspired by him. And then, of course, this narrative I heard in many, because I've been to Mauritius, of course, I served. Then I visited Fiji a couple of times. I visited Caribbean a couple of times. This whole issue that many of these people were leaving a miserable life behind was not entirely right. Now, that was a colonial argument that by accepting an unfair deal through indenture, they were not very unfortunate because they were leaving behind a more miserable life, right? That argument was not entirely correct.
Right.
Those who went, they were not all living a miserable life in their own way. And then I used to ask this question to my friends: will somebody tell me who created those miserable conditions there. Right? It was the colonial mismanagement of Indian economy and rural life which created the miserable conditions in the first place.
Right.
And then they left the miserable situation there. But who created the miserable situation? Right? A country which contributed almost 23-24% of the global trade could not be a miserable place. So it was converted into a miserable place. So that responsibility cannot be taken away from those who were responsible for this miserable condition. Right? Neha, I turn to you now. You heard two wonderful, stories from Vijay and from Asutosh. I know you have also been very closely associated with this whole matter, and your work on women amongst the endangered diaspora, I think is in a way path-breaking. I have heard these presentations from, you heard the other day, Bapande.
Yeah.
She wrote a lot on women in diaspora, especially the endangered diaspora. Again, there are many, different views whether the women were a loser in the process, or at the end of the day was not at all loser, it was a gainer in the process in terms of greater equity and equality, in terms of a more, leadership and equal role and all that stuff. Please tell me how you look at this whole thing, especially from the viewpoint of the position of women in the endangered experience.
Yeah. Recently, like 2 years back, I have been awarded PhD. So what intrigued me to do research on women, like endangered women, I was going through one project that was conducted or completed by Professor Badri Narayan. And he did a very extensive research on migration, migration from Bhojpuri belt. So when we read literature on migration or more on indentured labor migration, so we think that we have studied migration from economic, political perspective. So what intrigued me that we should also try to understand the intricacies attached to it when it comes to women, in terms of male were migrating and they were leaving their family behind. So it's important to understand the emotional impact of migration on those left behind community, like how they try to adjust with the situations, what were their coping strategies. So that intrigued me most, and I just commenced my PhD research. So I just started with India. I collected Videsiya folk songs. That is also a kind of I would say the major primary source to study how they experience this the whole migration, and what were their conditions in the absence of their husband, what were the problems they were facing, how they have expressed the feeling of pain, feeling of separation. So this when you read or when you see the content of the songs, then you will see what kind of socio-cultural background were there, what kind of problems they were facing in terms of being into the family, in-laws, and the tortures they were facing. And they are also trying to stopping their husband, they should not go, so how they will manage in the absence of their husband. So that is something I think that we should also study migration from women perspective, because it has always been noted that women are not counted in the whole history of migration, because they have also contributed more, not in terms of cultural production, but in terms of also they contributed in the plantation economy. And they have also played an important role of moral support, because when I was interviewing Professor Arvind Bisesar in MGI, and he was narrating one story. One story is he just recited one line. उन लोग के चीनी धता था तो उन लोग के मेहनत सूखा था. It means like it's something like you are working hard and you are thinking like the pain is like inflicted upon you and you are like thinking, okay, let it go, like whatever the condition is there, okay, because things are not favorable, but you are putting your 100%, so you should not like let it go waste. So this kind of like women are also playing as a moral support of their partners. So it's not only about like women are like projected as that they are the like producer of like culture, like they are disseminating their cultural values, but they are also contributing in the plantation economy. They are also contributing in terms of their cultural dissemination. What we call Mauritius or mini India, when we visit Mauritius, we see that still people are maintaining their cultural values. It's because like women are also trying to retain their cultural values. They are also trying to transmit these values to next generation. So it's not like when I was reading literature, there are many literatures like written by Marina Carter. So when I was going through literature, Indian culture, like it has been labeled as like superstitious, there are barbarous, there are licentious orgies. So these kind of terminology, when I was like going through that literature, it's something that provoked me. No, we should also like try to study like more in terms of like women, how they express their feeling of like emotion, like feeling of pain and separation and trauma and nostalgia. So when I was trying to do a kind of critical analysis of those songs, so I just I was trying to see how women also suffered. When we talk about like, okay, men were migrating to different colonies, they suffered a lot because they were going through a kind of trauma and they survived the atrocities. But what happened to those who left behind? They also suffered. So this kind of narrative, I think we should also like bring into the mainstream of discussion. We should also focus more on women perspectives, and we should also do a kind of good research studies on left behind communities. Because when I was reading one article by Badri Narayan Tiwari, so I was reading like they used to write letters to their families, but they got intercepted in between. So they are there in the Suriname archive. So I think this can also be a kind of good study to just to know how what kind of pain they went through. It's not just a longing for their homeland, but it's also longing for their relatives also, and they had longing for their like loved ones also who left the Indian shore and they went to different colonies across seven seas. They also kind of try to maintain a kind of connection, but somehow because of like that time the communication channel was not improvised enough to be like to be connected with their family. So I think it is also important to understand the social cost they paid and the kind of repercussions of psychological repercussion of migration on left behind communities. So this study was more of a kind of emotional impact of migration on left behind women.
Neha, I can tell you, my own exposure to the indentured diaspora came a bit late in my career. Though I went to Fiji and Caribbean on official tours, interacted with people there, but my real understanding of the indentured diaspora came when I went to Mauritius. Now, when I went to the first function, former Minister of Culture, Chuni, His Excellency, Mr. Chuni, he started singing a song, Calcutta Se Chuttal Jahaz. Now, that was nothing but the expression of pain of those who were left behind, in fact, right? And you won't believe, in that meeting we had about 300 odd people, and everybody was crying. The pain of those who were left behind went with those who went to these places. So it was a dual pain of those who stayed behind, and that pain of leaving them behind went with these indentured workers, and they kept missing that relationship, right? So I think you're absolutely right. This story is still only partly told. We still do not have a 360-degree understanding of the story, right? And then, of course, as I mentioned, when I heard, in fact, when it comes to women, the rural women historically was more liberated than the urban middle classes, right? I'm sure you are scholars, I am not. But when you look at the socio-cultural situations in even in the old Indian rural society, and the problem begins with the urbanization when you face unknown risks. And when you face unknown risks, what is that you protect? You protect your vulnerabilities. And women were seen as a vulnerability, and as a result had to be protected from the unknown threat, right? And that brought restrictions on women, right? So I think people must understand that those who went under the indentured program, in my view, relatively those women were more liberated in their status in the society. Though, of course, women has been discriminated all over the world. India or no country is an exception to that. And still we are fighting those battles of creating equality. I'll go back to Vijaya. Vijaya, since you are connected with both the slave route project and the indentured route project. There was a temptation, I remember, in the international discussion on the modern day, what is called human trafficking, and then comparing that with slavery, right? And we were very upset as Indian diplomats that, how can you compare an illegal repression with a legal repression? These are two very, very different situations. Nobody can legally claim the right to exploit an illegal immigrant or human beings trafficked. But the slavery, they were entitled to exploit them, own them. This was a miserable situation, right? So tell me, how do you respond to this situation? Because I see this expression used very often, even now, that let's fight the modern day slavery. The modern day slavery is a miserable situation in its own right and must be tackled with a very firm hand. But confusing the two issues, in my view, in fact dilutes the evil of slavery system. This today, it's illegal, but that was part of the system. How could the system and the law permit ownership of other human beings? Because nobody can stand up and say today's human trafficking has any legal sanction. No, it's not. It's illegal to start with. It's illegal to handle it at any stage. I wish the same law applied to slavery. It didn't, right? It was legal to exploit. It was legal to own, right? So tell me, how do you react to this kind of confusion in the society?
I think I entirely agree with what you're saying, because for myself, I have specialized for many years in the history of slavery in Mauritius. And as you know, Mauritian slavery is entirely colonial slavery.
Yes.
And we have seen many times what I would call apologists for slavery using the argument, as you have just said, quite rightly so, yes, but slavery still exists today, or slavery existed before colonial slavery. They talk about Arab slavery or traditional slavery, and they even talk about India, there being what they call traditional forms of slavery. But to use, as you have said again, to use that term to apply to colonial slavery is totally wrong, because as you said, slavery was legal in the colonial empire, whether it was in England or France or Holland or Spain or whatever. Not only was it legal to own another human being, it was legal, it was legitimized by official religion, Christian religion. In the Bible itself, you have the idea of the children of Ham, the idea that people of a darker skin color are uncivilized, need to be civilized, need to be given or brought or even force European culture on them. So all this was legal. In Mauritius, I don't know if Ashutosh, I think you know this, the Roman Catholic religion was the only authorized religion in Mauritius, and all other religions were not allowed. Slaves were punished when they tried to speak in their own traditional languages or practice any of their own beliefs or rites or rituals. So legally, not only was the slave an economic good, a piece of furniture who could be bought, sold, rented, insured, because if a ship carrying slaves capsized or was shipwrecked, the owner of the ship could claim insurance on behalf of the slaves who had died, because they were not human beings, they were property like cattle or goods. So considering a human being as a piece of furniture, a piece of property, is the most distinctive part of colonial slavery, and that should never be forgotten and should be highlighted. And as I've just said, legitimized by official religion, which is not the case in what we call modern slavery today. It's completely different because it is illegal. And also in traditional forms of what I would call maybe servitude or debt. I would not call traditional slavery before the colonial era as slavery, because slavery is an English word or a French word. And I don't think this word existed in the traditional languages that existed in Africa or Latin America or Asia. So to use the word slave or slavery to encompass all forms of inequality or bondage or indebtedness, I think is totally wrong. You really have to understand the culture in those countries. Yes, and secondly, very important, is colonial slavery involved what we call, some historians call natal alienation. You're taken away from your country, from your family forever. You never see your family ever again. You never see your country ever again. You can't even keep your own name or your culture or your identity. So it's complete stripping off of a person's whole identity. And that has not occurred in any other country or any other era in the world, whether even Roman period or Greek or traditional India or traditional African societies. This has never happened. If people were indebted to another family, but they stayed within the same village or region. So I totally agree with you. We must not say drown the fish in the water. You need to see the specificity of colonial slavery for what it is.
Yes. So I totally, in fact, this is what we used to argue all the time. But, finally, in this age of social media, it's very difficult to ensure that the correct argument reaches people, in fact. So most of the time, all kinds of confusion prevails. And sometimes the wrong argument prevails, in fact. Neha, in fact, since your work on endangered societies, in fact, many a times, in fact, if you permit me, in literature, when they refer to endangered, they say slavery by other name. Tell me, how do you react to this expression that endangered was also slavery by other means? In fact, I am also guilty of using this term on many occasions myself.
I think there's a big debate on that. I don't know if this is resolved yet. I don't know what Ashutosh thinks. You have the Tinkerian debate, as you know, and then you have new generations of historians who don't agree. I can't say I wouldn't say that indenture is slavery, but it's definitely the way it was practiced in Mauritius and so many other countries, it was unfree. I don't think the laborers who came to Mauritius were free to choose the employer. In Mauritius, the indentured system actually has a penal clause, which means if you leave your employer, you can be imprisoned and go to jail. So this is not free labor by any means. So I would not say that indenture is slavery, but also the fact to remember is that indenture took place immediately after the abolition of slavery in Mauritius and in Trinidad and Guyana, which means the ideological justification for slavery in the minds of former slave owners who became employers of indentured laborers, their minds did not change, their ideology did not change. And so the way they behaved towards indentured laborers has many similarities with how they behave towards indentured laborers. I'll give you just a few examples. For example, under slavery, they had what we call Maroon Hunts. That means they used to literally hunt slaves. And if they found the slave, because there was a reward for it, they would cut off the left hand of the slave and take that in a bag and take it to the Maroon office to get their reward. So we didn't have this sort of atrocious system under indenture, but we did have vagrant hunts where the police used the same methodology as Maroon Hunts to go and search for vagrant laborers who had run away from their employer. So there are, I would say, continuities with slavery, but I can give you many other examples. Flogging, for example, flogging did continue, maybe not as many lashes, but it did continue. Poor conditions of health as slave owners or indentured labor owners, they both adopted a cheap labor strategy. They did not want to pay for doctors and proper hospitals, etc. So the health of indentured laborers suffered a lot. The mortality rate was huge in Mauritius. I think a third, Ashutosh probably has the latest figures, but at least a third of indentured laborers never survived the ship voyage or indenture because of health issues. So personally, I would not say slavery is the same as indenture, or indenture is the same as slavery, but indenture is certainly a very inhuman and an unfree system of labor. I don't know if that helps to answer you.
Yes, I entirely agree with you. In fact, Ashutosh, you mentioned that there was lack of awareness about what happened as part of the indenture system within India. So the Indian society did not fully appreciate what was happening and did not start talking about this exercise or inhuman exercise. But Ashutosh, this happened during colonial period. And one of the major problems of that period was that one part of the country did not know what was happening in other part of the country. Right. So most of these people went from Eastern UP, Bihar, and as a result, the other parts of the country were not fully familiar with what was happening. Because people were going out in any case under the colonial rule, sometimes to fight for the colonial ruler in other lands and all that stuff. So their awareness of what was happening was not there. That is why, to begin with, in fact, people thought, oh, at the end of the day, this is a better system because there is a contract, right? So I am not really exploited. It's a contract. If I agree, I go by my agreement. So they felt empowered by this, right? But then the reality dawned on them later. This contract didn't mean much. So tell me, how do you look at this now? Because if you ask me, having that for a pretty long time now, familiarity with the indentured system is still not there. Even though we do, high profile, high visibility functions like PBDs and other activities throughout the year, but still, the mainstream awareness about the indenture experiment, or the great experiment they call it, is not there. So tell me what people like you, in fact, need to do, or the project needs to do for carrying this awareness to. There are a few novels written by some of our authors, but how many people would have read them? Very few. Right. So I think there is a need for disseminating this information to the wider population, because Vijay, the slavery awareness is very, very wide.
That's true.
Compared to that, indentured awareness is almost zero.
That's true.
What do you think, Vida?
Yeah, I think it's a really valid question, and that is why indenture labor route project is important, because that is the origin point through which we are trying to disseminate across the country, wherever indentured laborers and their descendants went or staying. Making this subject as making this subject as an important subject for the human society, actually. So I think in Indian context, in 2017, when I organized a conference on commemorating 100 years of end of the indenture, I organized a conference in Nehru Memorial Museum and Library. At that time, I was in Leeds and working on a big project called quote unquote becoming coolies. So the problem which I identify that in India, even in the academia, we are not yet made this subject as part of curriculum. That's the major weakness of our education system, because if you will not educate your kids or your children, then people will not know. Only people are knowing about indenture when they are entering into PhD and looking into some of their friends who are staying outside and discovering that, oh, they went as as indentured laborers from India. Because even myself, I discovered because Brijlal came and he narrated the story, and that's how I knew. Otherwise, I was not aware about this system or kind of the migration. So the weakness is that we need to introduce this subject in the school curriculum as well as in the higher education. So this is the one thing. Apart from that, I think government should also foster some major research projects on indentured diaspora, because Indian diaspora, as at the initial comment you said that, or even ma'am said that, in Indian diaspora means those NRIs who went after independence, so going to America or some other capitalist countries. In Indian imagination, Indian diaspora means going to US or UK or somewhere. So we need to let people know that that is not only diaspora. The original Indian diaspora is those who went as indentured laborers in the early 19th century, and their descendants are spread across the world, and they have played important role in the economy of the world, not only the third world economy, rather making first world economy prominent. Their role cannot be avoided, because they were the backbone of the economy, which we are not yet teaching anywhere, actually. So I think government should collaborate with institute like your Antarashtriya Sahyog Parishad and come up with some concrete plan in terms of research, as well as in terms of introducing it in the every stage of the curriculum. That's what I feel. So
You know, Bhastosh, Ruchi, just find out what happened to Neha. She is disconnected.
Sir, she messaged me that she is trying, but the campus internet has been shut down due to power failure, so she is not been able to connect.
Oh God. Asutosh, just for responding to your, idea. In fact, DRRC, we have signed MOUs with educational institutions. We have just signed one with Gujarat Central University. We signed with Khalsa College Delhi University, where in fact we have offered to them that using our own resources in terms of skills, knowledge, we will organize a 30-hour capsule for their mainstream students. Those who are studying economics, sociology, history, political science, whatever. Because there is an economic, sociology, political history angle to diaspora, right?
Right.
So what we are planning to do is that we will just organize a 30-hour capsule for undergraduate, postgraduate students and give them a bit of exposure on the history of diaspora with special emphasis on the Indian diaspora. Now, they will work on it only when they know it,
Yeah.
right? You can only solve a problem that is known to you.
That's true.
If it is not known, how would you solve it? So we are trying to do this, and through this program, maybe in case your center, because what we are suggesting is that there is a complementarity between the academic institution
Right.
and the institution like the Diaspora Research and Resource Center. Your approach is academic. Our approach is practical. So many of the practical issues which you will not know as part of academics, and many of the academics issues we will not know as practitioners. So can we really create a synergy between the two aspects? And we, in a way, give the ideas to the students that there is a self-interest in doing this. You see, because it has become an important part of the international relations.
That's true.
Now, those international relations are economic, technology, geopolitics, you name it. Now, unless these youngsters, they understand these dynamics, how the diaspora can play a greater role in the global peace and stability and development, how will they get interested in this? Right? For example, you cannot deal with Indian international relations today without understanding the importance of diaspora.
Yeah. That's
Yep. So we are trying a bit on this. Hope maybe we'll succeed to some extent. What is your future roadmap? Where are we heading as far as this endangered labor route project is concerned? Unmute.
The ILRP, as you know, started in 2014, but it only actually started being operational in 2017 when we had our first scientific committee meeting. So at that time, there were only, I think, about 10 members. But of course, we hoped we'll expand it to have at least up to 18 persons involved, representing quite a wide variety of the indentured diaspora, covering not only British, but also French, and I think we have Dutch and Danish diasporas, indentured diasporas. So we want to do that and also expand, having maybe some heritage experts to help us popularize the history through sites, curriculums, and so on. and also observers, because we feel there's so many other people who can contribute who may be outside the scientific community. And so we would like to invite them to come as observers. So it can be high commissioners or diplomats, or it could be people from the community visiting people from a country who happen to be there at that time. So I think it's very important that we have a large body as possible. For the time being, for example, just to give you an idea, we have 4 representatives from the Indian Ocean region, South Africa, Réunion, Amit and Ashutosh, of course, and myself as Mauritian. From the Pacific, we have 3 members from Fiji. They're very forceful, and someone from, I think is from Malaysia. We have 5 from the Atlantic Caribbean region, Minakshi from Guadeloupe, Lomash from Guyana, Nalini from Mohabir from Canada, I think Ravindra Dev from Guyana, and Radhika from Trinidad. So we hope to also encourage countries to start national committees. So why do we think this is important? Again, we don't want just the scientific community to be involved in the indentured labor rule project. The community as a whole, descendants, have to be involved. So whether you're an artist or a musician or politician, you're an NGO, you're an environmental activist, whatever, we want a larger body to be created in each country, and that will give support to the whoever is the ILRP member in that country. So last year we had our 2nd meeting, scientific committee, and we did a sort of reporting on what was going on in each country, and we were all very concerned that in some countries, Mauritius, everything was quite active and is considered a big project, etc. But other countries, maybe where descendants are not in a sort of numerically important, their IRRP and even any history of indenture is considered not important at all. In the University of, I think, Guyana, there's not even a single historian studying indenture or who knows about indenture. So that's why we couldn't actually get someone from Guyana to be part of the scientific committee, which is crazy because from the own country, you should have historians from the country itself. So this is a huge challenge. So we thought the national committee might, from the community itself, the descendants might give a push. And we also asked the Mauritian government if they would agree to having an interministerial committee. So we thought that this interministerial committee, if we get as, even 10 governments formally involved in this project, they can give a push to those countries where the indentured labor route is not working so well. So we had Mauritian government agreed very happily. And after a few months, we had the first interministerial committee. So we didn't get many actual ministers present, but they did send their representatives, permanent secretaries or whoever, and very strong letters of support. And some even designated their National Archives director to be part of the database project that we have. So that was promising, but I think each country has such different specific sort of history and the way their society is set up, multilingual, multiracial society. It's very difficult for us to manage, and we have to sort of delegate responsibilities to the regional subcommittees and let them deal with their situation, which they only know best. Us sitting here in Mauritius cannot tell someone from Trinidad, well, you should do it this way. I think they need to find a modus operandi that works for them, and what works for them does not necessarily work for India or South Africa or Mauritius. So that's very important. Can I continue a bit? I just wanted to talk to you about 2 very important projects. We were talking about the curriculum.
Yes.
I think one of the very important concerns of the members was the youth. And we felt that the youth, as you said, not just in India, but even in our own countries, know so little about our history. This year, for example, in the pandemic, history has been removed completely from the syllabus in primary school because they want to narrow the syllabus because students have lost so much. And of course, indenture is part of history. So this year, no student will know anything about Mauritian history. But also, I think it's important that we focus on the youth using the new technology, as you rightly pointed out. Our youth today know their Indian roots, not through indenture, but through Bollywood. And that's, to us, I mean, maybe we are of the generation that is quite shocked by this when we see my own children, dressing and behaving and thinking they need to copy Bollywood stars. But I think we really need to connect them to the authentic culture that exists in India, that existed in Mauritius. And of course, the culture in Mauritius was, we can say, Indo-Mauritian. It's not quite Indian, but something developed out of our own situation here, which they need to remember, respect, and be inspired by, not only by, Bollywood films and so on. So youth is a big project we have. We would like to, if you can help in any way possible, that would be great. And also our database project, which Ashutosh is partly responsible for in our committee. That also, if you can help us to get access to documents, photos, which we can put on our website in our database. We want to map every village that from where indentured immigrants came from. Unfortunately, as you know, the names have changed and sometimes the villages have disappeared. So constructing this list of all the villages that existed in the past and today will help Girmitas connect with the original family. That's a huge contribution that you could make in terms of your NGO. I could go on, but these are some of the main things.
No, thank you so much. In fact, that is what I will now take to Ashutosh. Ashutosh, in fact, I do see a lot of activities taking place in the indentured root countries about this whole thing, right? They discovering their roots, going through the history, studying what happened in the process. But I don't see much activity in India on that. Yes?
Right.
Now, while the destination is working on it, but the source is not working. So I think there is a need that, the universities and education institutions, they need to start narrating this story. Because as I say, unless now you mentioned about technology, Vijay. In fact, the 21st century technology means you need to have a loud voice. Now, it's a competition between whose voice is louder. Right? And unless you are able to raise your voice, you will not be heard by anyone. Yes? And who can do it? The educational institutions, the youth. Because they are on social media channels much more active than the earlier generation, because we didn't even have tools. Now, I think there is a need for creating what is called a reasonable literature, not really the gossip part of it. There will be a lot of gossip already, so let those who are working on gossip, let them work on gossip. But I think the educational institutions must create evidence-based stories and information. And then take that information to the reader. That it is not only the history of the indenture, it is also the history of our own country, our own society. How can we miss out on that important part of our own history? Right? Give me, in terms of our ancient international relations, give me one other example which could be as important as the indentured process, in fact. Can you give me one single? Of course, when you collectively put a lot of things, I can tell you many stories which are very important. But please tell me in the history at least in the medieval period, give me one more instance which would be more important than the indentured experiment, which carried India to the world in an organized, structured manner. And these people have created history in so many countries, as you rightly said. They were not only part of the development of those islands, but they were contributors to the so-called empires, in fact.
Yes, of course.
So, Asutosh, you have the last word.
Yes.
Coming to an end.
Yeah, thank you, sir. So, we are doing some activities, some research, and so, for instance, in Banaras Hindu University, where I'm teaching now, we have introduced, from the next semester, we have already introduced a master course on Indian diaspora and global studies. So that was our endeavor, and our vice chancellor and other authorities were keen in this course, and that's how they passed this course now. So now we have a separate master degree program in Indian diaspora and global studies, and in that course we are 80% focusing on indenture, because myself is an indenture scholar, and another colleague, Professor Ghanshyam, is also, his sort of research is also related to indenture in Caribbean. So we have this. Apart from that, and as we have already been discussing with this in the meeting of International Scientific Committee of Indentured Labor Route Project, that I have 6 PhD scholars, and we all are working on tracing the villages. And I have already traces 60-70 villages near Buxar area, where where my ancestor, from where I belong actually. So 60-70 villages we have already traced, and we know people, and I can anytime go and now we are trying to expand it. Due to the pandemic and all these problems, we are not frequently moving out, going or finding out, because we have list. We have list from Mauritius, the returnees list. And one of the student is particularly working on returned indentured laborers. And since we have the list, it's easy to find out the villages. As ma'am was saying, and she's true, that sometimes the villages are disappeared or the name has been changed, but luckily we have generated or developed a technique to trace that villages. So in so in that way, my group and myself, we are able to find out. Now what I feel, and even Indentured Labor Route Project also feels, and collectively you can also be part of that, that if we can trace all villages, as ma'am was saying, that from all villages of northern India and the South India, and if we can make it on a map where one can click and quickly go through, because now it's Google and map thing, and one can directly reach to the Google map, through the Google map, to their village. So if we all can come together for that, and take some responsibility of one district or something like, then I think it would be possible to make kind of the online map through which one can check the route, or check the village name and click it and find out the way to reach to the village, something like. That's what I feel. And I have been slowly doing. I'm trying to do it, but I know I can't do all over the India. I can do only maybe UP or Bihar, some sort of the UP and some part of Bihar, because it's huge project, and alone I can't do. That's the problem. So we all together can do it. Yeah.
So I agree with you.
In terms of publication, definitely from Cambridge University Press, while I was working on this indenture, becoming coolies project. So we are coming with 13 volumes. We have already published, 14 volume under Professor Maurice Hassan Khan, and ma'am has already, that center, I think Apravasi Ghat already published Angaze, the first the conference which happened in Mauritius, and so that volume has already been in public. These are really important recent research. 14 volume from Manohar and and Routledge. So we have already brought it. Now 10 more volumes are coming. So in terms of publication, definitely we are also doing well. In fact, we are doing much more. I mean, we have done best in the publication than tracing the villages and the routes. So at that front, definitely we are doing well. Now from Cambridge University Press, we have another series that is called Global Indian Diaspora series. And apart from that, there is another series started by myself and Nilesh Bose from Routledge, that is called Indian Migration History series. So we have so many series under which we are publishing, focusing especially on indentured diaspora. So
right.
Yeah.
No,
That's
I think my small suggestion, in fact, do not extricate only indentured from Indian diaspora for your courses. Why I'm saying this? Because the 21st century youth also seeks, you see, where is the innovation? Where is creativity? Where is my future? When you bring in the larger context of diaspora, right, they find it easier to associate with that story because that story becomes the engine, right? Because when I tell you, the youngsters diaspora means technology, suddenly their eyes open. You see, what? Tell us now. How does diaspora mean technology? Or when I say it means economy, it means billions of dollars. They say, oh, tell us now that story, right? So when I say it means international relations, right? Then their eyes open. So I think do not only concentrate on one aspect, because then you need a highly committed youth who will follow that path. But the mainstream youth, that is why we are trying to integrate this 30-hour course with the mainstream courses. Okay, you are a history student. All right, let me tell you a wonderful story of history which you are missing, in fact.
Yeah.
Or you are an economics student. I'll tell you the economic story which you are missing, in fact. Or the future of technology, in fact. Or the international relations. Because very few people realize that today diaspora occupies very, very key positions, and they can make a difference in the way the world behaves.
Yeah.
Right? So I think, let's not deny them exposure to the larger story, and then you can specialize in any part that you want. So we'll be very happy if you want us to collaborate in any of those programs where we share our ideas, our experiences, and add a little bit more kilocalories to your initiative and programs. We'll be very happy to do it. And if your people write some articles or they write some books and they find it difficult to pay for their publication, we'll be very happy to cover them under DRRC. So those are small. We can carry your message to the government. In fact, tell them, okay, do this. This is important. They may not agree with us, but at least we can raise the volume of your voice, right? With your last 2 minutes, whatever you want to say.
I was listening with a lot of interest to Ashutosh and the list of research and publication that he's involved in. It's very impressive, and congratulations. My only worry is that most of these publications are not accessible to us in the diaspora. To be frank with you, even the Professor Hassan Khan's volumes, we don't find it anywhere here. So we need to find some way where these books can be spread knowledge about them, information. Maybe through our website, this is something we can do. But I really want to thank you for your approach towards the youth. I think this really needs to be at least one of the two focuses of the indentured labor route, because we're living in a world which is so competitive, so harsh. Our youth in the diaspora really need this cultural baggage, this foundation, which is not being fulfilled right now in our societies. I don't know how to express it, but this is almost a question of life and death of your own culture and of your history. Being subsumed under, multicultural societies has its dangers. It's great to be in a multicultural society, but at the same time, there's a risk of losing your authentic culture that you have come from. And this is worrying to us. I see it, as I said, with my own children. We want to maintain certain type of living or lifestyle that respects our ancestry, our history, and all the values that the indentured ancestors brought with them. Hard work, very important, sacrifice, savings, and so on, not this sort of mass cultural entertaining lifestyle that many of our youth are currently living in. So I don't know how you can help in any of this, but I can send you a letter with some of the ideas that we have.
Oh, yes.
How you can manage to help. But I'd like to thank you again for allowing me a voice here on your platform. Thank you.
To be with us and sparing your time for us. Youth is in fact our priority under DRRC. So there are quite a few initiatives for youth, which probably we can discuss some other day, because it needs more time to explain those points. My emphasis is that we need to talk to the youth in their language. If we talk to them in our language, believe me, there will be a barrier. They are a different generation. They talk different language. They understand a different language. If we tell them this story in our language, we'll make a mistake. We'll have to go down to their level, understand their language, then speak to them in their language. My colleague is sitting there, ask her, I talk to her in her language and she listens to me. Otherwise, she will say, you old man, get off my back. Yes?
Yeah.
I think humorous last expression. I thank you very much. Ruchi will prepare a small report in terms of the outcomes of the conversation. Then if you write to us, email or whatever with your ideas, we'll include those ideas in our report, and we share the report with the Government of India, different agencies, that these are the ideas which are worth consideration. So with these words, thank you very much once again. Thank you so much.
Thank you. Thank you. Bye-bye.